The room was thick with tension, the kind that hums beneath fluorescent lights and echoes off marble walls. Cameras clicked like ticking clocks counting down to detonation. Every eye press, staffers, the American public watching through glass screens was locked on one woman, Jasmine Crockett. Her expression was calm, unbothered, surgical. Across from her, Justice Clarence Thomas sat in silence, his posture heavy with entitlement. The air between them seemed to vibrate. Crockett leaned forward, her voice slicing through the chamber. "With all due respect, Justice Thomas." The phrase landed like a gavel crack. Then silence. You could almost hear hearts skip. One senator shifted in his seat. Reporters froze mid-keystroke. Even the cameras paused for half a breath, unsure if they were capturing history or heresy. She continued, her tone firm but measured. "Respect is earned. And when those entrusted with justice trade it for favors, the people notice." The line hit like a tremor. On the monitor, the chyron flashed, "Crockett confronts Clarence Thomas." Someone whispered, "Did she just say that?" The question rippled through social feeds faster than the sound could fade in the room. Thomas's jaw flexed, but he said nothing. A smirk thin, forced crossed his face. Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't need to. Her power wasn't volume. It was precision. Every word felt rehearsed by conviction, not script. The audience at home felt it in their chests, the shock of truth spoken where it was never meant to echo. This wasn't a political exchange. It was a reckoning in real time. As the tension rose, Crockett's voice softened, dangerous in its calm. "For too long we've watched those who serve themselves sit above those they're meant to serve. That ends when someone dares to name it," the crowd murmured. Thomas blinked. History seemed to lean forward, waiting, then cut to replay. Slow motion. The phrase looping across screens, dissected, amplified, celebrated. Hashtags ignite. Yideri, with all due respect, trends within minutes. And as the scene fades into the swirl of commentary and outrage, the narrator's voice returns. But what she said next would ripple across the nation because sometimes one sentence doesn't just challenge power, it unmasks it. For years, Clarence Thomas had sat above judgment robe gleaming, gavel steady, eyes half closed in the confidence of untouchable power. The court was his fortress, its marble steps polished by reverence. But beneath the shine, the cracks were spreading. A slow corrosion hidden behind smiles and ceremony. The headlines began quietly, a whisper in political corners. Luxury vacations, undisclosed gifts, billionaire benefactors. Each revelation landed like a dull thud, scandal fatigue numbing the public, the powerful shrugging. Yet something about this story refused to die. It lingered because it smelled of betrayal, the kind that rots institutions from the inside out. While Thomas coasted on decades of influence, another story had been unfolding in quieter rooms. Jasmine Crockett, daughter of Texas grit, civil rights attorney turned Congresswoman, had been watching. Her life had been built not on favors, but on fighting for people who never got them. She carried the courtroom in her bones, cross-examinations, closing arguments, the electricity of truth when it finally finds oxygen. Where he dined on yachts, she walked neighborhoods still waiting for justice. Where he collected patrons, she collected stories, immigrants, workers, mothers standing before eviction notices. Every injustice she witnessed became a layer of armor. And when the time came, she would wear it into battle. The nation didn't expect confrontation. It expected compliance. The unwritten rule in Washington was simple. Do not name the untouchable. The court, the justices, the legacy, they were holy relics, not human beings. But Crockett saw it differently. Power is still mortal, she would tell her staff. And when mortals forget humility, the people must remind them. So when the hearing began, it wasn't just another oversight session, it was a stage set for reckoning. The networks didn't yet know they were filming a turning point. Viewers at home felt the undertone, though. Every exchange, every clipped response from Thomas's allies carried the arrogance of those who believe consequence is a myth. And there she was, sitting still, notes untouched. Her calm was louder than their bluster. To some, she looked unassuming. To others, unshakable. She wasn't there to grandstand, she was there to puncture the illusion that justice and corruption could coexist. For years, the narrator intones, he sat above judgment, until she brought the gavel of truth. That's when the temperature in the room shifted. Crockett's voice carried not the fury of opposition, but the precision of accountability. She wasn't just speaking to Thomas, she was speaking to every American who'd been told to stay silent, to every worker who'd watched the rich rewrite the rules, integrity versus indulgence, grit versus entitlement. The scales tipped. Viewers felt it, even if they couldn't name it. Something righteous was unfolding. And yet this was only the opening act. Crockett's restraint was strategic. Her silence between sentences spoke louder than the words themselves. The more composed she remained, the smaller the arrogance across from her appeared. Commentators would later say this was the moment the hearing turned from routine to historic. In those few minutes, the illusion of invincibility cracked, not because she shouted, but because she measured every truth like a verdict. The narrator's voice fades into the hum of the chamber. But Crockett wasn't finished. Her words would turn the entire room against him. Before the marble halls, before the silence of his courtroom, there was a boy in Georgia. His world was red clay, wood smoke, and Sunday sermons about dignity in the face of despair. Clarence Thomas grew up knowing struggle, walking barefoot to school, reciting lessons by candlelight. Poverty wasn't a story he read, it was the air he breathed. His grandmother's voice was gospel. Never forget where you came from. For a long time, he didn't. He rose through the world like a promise fulfilled. Yale Law, the halls of power. His story became proof that America's doors could open for those who refused to quit. To many, he was living testimony, black resilience made flesh. But the higher he climbed, the fainter that grandmother's voice became. The clay roads of his youth faded behind the polished marble of Washington, and in that distance, conviction began to thin. He spoke once for the voiceless. Now he dines with the powerful. The transformation wasn't sudden, it was slow, like a tide that pulls you out without realizing how far you've drifted. First came the admiration of the elite, the invitations to retreats and galas. Then the friendships with men whose fortunes could buy silence and shape headlines. When the revelations came lavish vacations, secret benefactors, unreported gifts, it wasn't the money that shocked people. It was the betrayal of principle. Because this was the man who once claimed moral authority as his shield, who lectured others on ethics, who invoked his humble beginnings as proof of incorruptibility. And now, those black and white photographs of his childhood, the dirt roads, the worn shoes, the proud smile blur into images of champagne flutes and private jets. The contrast burns. He had taken an oath, impartiality, integrity, honor. But somewhere along the way, the oath became a costume worn for ceremony, discarded in comfort. Every gift accepted, every friendship with the rich and well-connected, chipped away at the belief that justice could be blind. The narrator's voice grows heavy. When those entrusted with fairness start measuring truth by the price of their friends, the system itself begins to rot. And rot doesn't announce itself. It creeps. It smiles. It shakes hands and signs opinions. It whispers that everything is fine while it eats away the foundation. For years, Thomas's defenders called criticism unfair, partisan, disrespectful. But the question wasn't political. It was moral. How does a man who once knew hunger forget what it felt like to starve? How does one who rose from the margins side with those who profit from keeping others there? The irony is cruel. He had been the embodiment of perseverance, yet his legacy now feels hollow, defined not by justice, but by indulgence. Every yacht photo, every undisclosed gift, every whispered dinner invitation is a reminder that proximity to power can intoxicate even those who once spoke against it. And for those who looked up to him, the young lawyers, the dreamers who believed his rise meant their future, the disappointment cut deep. They didn't see corruption in the abstract. They saw betrayal from one of their own. In the grand portrait of American power, Thomas became both symbol and warning. What happens when ambition outlives integrity? The narrative he once owned, black excellence, personal triumph, was now reclaimed by critics as evidence of how easily virtue bends under privilege. Still, the story isn't written in hatred. The narration is mournful, almost elegiac. "He wasn't born a villain," the voice continues. "He was born with a hunger to prove the world wrong." But comfort has a way of dulling hunger, and when the belly is full, it forgets the taste of struggle. Cut to images of him stepping out of limousines, shaking hands with donors, laughing over fine wine. The soundtrack swells, not triumphant but tragic, because this isn't just about one man, it's about what America does to those who climb too high to remember the ground beneath them. Every empire of ego begins with the same illusion, that righteousness can survive untested power. Thomas's downfall wasn't a single scandal, it was a slow surrender. 1,000 small compromises, each one easier than the last. And that's what Jasmine Crockett saw. Not the robe or the title, but the drift. She recognized it because she had fought against it all her life, the lure of privilege, the silence of complicity. She saw what the public refused to say aloud, that the moral weight of his position had become lighter than the gifts he accepted. The music fades, replaced by the sound of a gavel echoing in a hollow chamber. And that's when Jasmine decided enough was enough. Before the headlines, before the fiery hearings, there was simply Jasmine, a girl from Texas with more questions than answers, and a voice that always carried a little too much truth for polite company. She grew up under that relentless southern sun, in a world that demanded silence from those who didn't fit the mold. But Jasmine never learned how to be silent. She learned how to listen, how to see, how to fight. Her childhood wasn't gilded. It was grounded. She watched her parents work long hours, watched neighbors fight eviction, watched the system promise fairness while delivering excuses. The streets of Dallas were classrooms in resilience. From church basements to community centers, she absorbed one lesson again and again: justice was never given. It was taken by those brave enough to demand it. When she stepped into law school, she wasn't chasing prestige. She was chasing purpose. Other students talked about corporate firms, corner offices, power. Jasmine talked about people. She talked about the single mother evicted over a technicality, the teenager misjudged by a broken system, the communities where the law arrived late, if at all. Her professors said she was idealistic. They meant it as a warning. She took it as fuel. In the courtroom, that fire found form. As a young attorney, she fought for those who had no one else. She learned that the law is written in ink, but enforced in bias, and that sometimes the truth has to shout to be heard. Colleagues recall how she carried herself in front of a judge. Calm, deliberate, but with eyes that could slice through pretense. She didn't perform. She prosecuted the lie that power equals right. The gavel was her metronome, the heartbeat of her mission. Each case was a sermon on dignity, a belief that justice wasn't an institution, but a living, breathing promise that needed defenders. She became the attorney people called when they'd run out of options. Her clients didn't wear suits. They wore exhaustion. They didn't ask for miracles. They asked for fairness. But Jasmine's ambition was never about titles. It was about scale. Every case she won felt too small against the vastness of injustice. The real decisions, she realized, weren't made in courtrooms. They were made in Congress, behind closed doors, by those who had never met the people they claimed to represent. That realization didn't break her. It redirected her. The move from attorney to legislator wasn't easy. The same system that underestimated her in court tried to silence her in politics. She was too blunt, they said, too passionate, too unwilling to play the game. But that was the point she hadn't come to play. She'd come to change the rules. Her campaign wasn't built on donors. It was built on doorsteps. She shook hands until her voice cracked, listened to stories that politicians usually ignore, and promised one simple thing: I won't forget who I work for. That authenticity became her armor. And when she won her seat, she didn't trade that armor for a blazer, she wore it straight into the lion's den. In Washington, the marble hallways echoed with the same tone she'd heard her whole life: entitlement disguised as expertise. She saw it in the smirks, in the way certain men interrupted her mid-sentence, in the way truth was treated as performance rather than principle. But she didn't bend. She learned to wield calm like a weapon. Her pauses became power, her restraint, her rebellion. When microphones turned toward her, she didn't raise her voice. She raised the stakes. Justice, she would say in interviews, isn't just about laws. It's about whether the people writing them still have a conscience. And people listened, not because she was loud, but because she was real. The more she spoke, the more the public saw something rare: conviction without cynicism. For progressives, for immigrants, for young Americans who'd grown up feeling unseen, Jasmine Crockett was proof that identity could be power, not a target. She spoke with the rhythm of a preacher and the logic of a lawyer. Her words carried not just arguments, but empathy. She became a voice that transcended party lines not by diluting her beliefs, but by dignifying her opponents. She refused to match arrogance with outrage. Instead, she countered it with grace. When pundits sneered, she smiled. When colleagues dismissed her, she doubled down on preparation. In a city addicted to theater, she stayed anchored in truth. Still, every crusader knows the calm before the storm. There was always a bigger fight on the horizon, a test not of her voice, but of her restraint. Washington would soon hand her that test, wrapped in pomp and hypocrisy. Because standing across from Clarence Thomas wasn't just another political exchange. It was symbolic, the clash between a system built to protect privilege and a woman forged to dismantle it. The narrator's voice softens, echoing over the hum of city traffic and courtroom echoes. She believed justice was more than law, it says. It was truth with heart, compassion, with courage. Archival footage rolls through in the mind's eye. Her early courtroom victories, community rallies, her swearing in at Congress, and then a slow dissolve into the moment we've been waiting for, her face across from his. The calm before eruption, her composure that famous. Unbreakable calm is about to be tested like never before. But when she faced Thomas's legacy of silence, the narrator whispers, she turned words into thunder. The chamber was already restless before she spoke. The buzz of side conversations, the shuffle of papers, the uneasy rhythm of whispers bouncing off the marble walls. Clarence Thomas's allies circled the moment like bodyguards around a king. They filled the air with deflection, procedural protests, and the familiar vocabulary of power words designed to confuse, to stall, to bury. But Crockett sat still, pen resting between her fingers, her gaze fixed forward. Her silence wasn't submission, it was sharpening. She waited for the noise to collapse under its own weight. And when it did, she rose. "Mr. Chairman," she began, her voice even, deliberate. "Before we drown in spin, let's remember why we're here." The room fell half quiet, the kind of quiet that means everyone knows a blow is coming. She continued, each word heavy but measured. "We're here because public trust is not a luxury item. It doesn't come in a gift box or on the back of a private jet." A few heads turned. Someone muttered, "Oh, she's going there." Across the table a senator chuckled, condescension dripping from his tone. "Congresswoman, you're misinterpreting the facts. These are long-standing traditions, hospitality, friendships. You can't criminalize relationships." Crockett didn't blink. "You're right. We can't criminalize relationships, but we can question the ones that buy silence. We can expose the ones that rot the meaning of justice." The murmuring grew louder, half outrage, half admiration. Thomas's defenders shifted uncomfortably. One tried to cut her off. "That's not relevant to—" She leaned in. "Relevance is the word Americans scream at their televisions every night when they see the rules change for the rich and break the poor. Don't tell me what's relevant." The first gasps rippled through the room. Thomas, sitting at the far end, offered a faint, dismissive grin, tight, knowing. It was the expression of a man accustomed to immunity. But even as he smiled, there was a flicker of something behind his eyes. He recognized the rhythm, the cadence of someone who wasn't afraid of him. Crockett turned her focus squarely toward him now. "You can buy influence," she said, letting the pause hang long enough for the microphones to catch the silence. "But you can't buy respect." The words detonated. Reporters jerked their heads up. Someone in the back whispered, "Did she just say that?" The cameras zoomed closer. Every lens wanted the same frame: Thomas's face, his smirk curdling. She didn't move, didn't smirk back. Her expression stayed grounded in calm conviction, the kind that makes arrogance shrink. Respect, she continued, is earned through service. It's guarded by humility. It's what you lose when you treat power like property. The senator who had laughed earlier was suddenly quiet. The entire table looked smaller now, crowded by the truth that no one had dared voice so plainly. Thomas adjusted his glasses, searching for a retort that never came. The room had turned on its axis, and everyone felt it. The hierarchy had shifted not because she yelled, but because she didn't need to. She went on, her tone softer now, almost mournful. Every person in this room took an oath. But an oath means nothing if it bends to the weight of a checkbook. Justice doesn't crumble overnight, it decays from the inside. Every time we let comfort outweigh conscience. The words echoed, each syllable finding the hollow spaces of the chamber. Outside in the hallway, journalists were already typing quotes. Inside, no one dared interrupt. A long pause. Then the faint click of cameras like punctuation marks in a sentence America wouldn't soon forget. Crockett took her seat again, pen back in hand. The storm she'd unleashed hung heavy in the air, invisible but undeniable. Thomas looked down at the table, his grin gone. And then, without raising her voice, without even looking up, she said one last line, almost as if to herself. Power can hide for years behind robes and rhetoric. But the truth? The truth never forgets your name. Silence. Pure, electric silence. The narrator's voice cut back in, low and steady. But her next line would silence him and the country. The chamber was still humming from the last exchange, a low, nervous energy that filled the air like static before a lightning strike. Jasmine Crockett sat motionless for a long beat, eyes locked forward, fingers interlaced on the desk before her. The tension wasn't just in the room, it was in the country. Millions were watching, waiting, hoping someone, anyone, would finally say what they had screamed at their screens for years. And then, she exhaled. "Justice Thomas," she began, her tone so steady it made the microphones lean in. "There was a time when your story inspired people like me, a black man from the South rising to the highest court in the land that was hope. But hope turns to heartbreak when the man who climbed the mountain forgets the people still climbing." The sentence hit with the quiet devastation of truth. A murmur rippled through the room, not applause, not outrage, but recognition. Every journalist in the gallery lifted their pens at once. Crockett continued, her cadence tightening like a drumbeat. "You sat where millions could never sit. You spoke where they'd never be heard. And yet, you used that voice not to lift them, but to protect those already above us all." Pause. Camera cut. Thomas's face unreadable, eyes fixed downward, the faintest flicker of discomfort breaking his stoicism. "You've accepted gifts worth more than most families earn in a decade," she said, each syllable measured, deliberate. "And you called it friendship. You've been shielded by those who profit from your silence, and you called it tradition. You've turned the word honor into a souvenir sold at the altar of power." The murmurs turned to gasps. A senator tried to object. "Mr. Chairman, this—" But the gavel struck once. Too late. The moment had already escaped protocol. Crockett leaned forward. "No, this is not disrespect. This is accountability. And accountability is the oxygen of democracy." Flash cuts, cameras blinking red, phones raised, hashtags birthing themselves in real time. Crockett vs. Thomas. "Speak truth. Justice speaks," she continued, her voice rising only slightly, but her words carried the gravity of a sermon. "Every time you stayed silent while justice burned, you became part of the fire. Every time you looked away from corruption, you let it grow teeth. And every time you told America you stood for the Constitution, you forgot that the Constitution is not a shield for greed, it's a promise to the people." The air thickened. Even those who opposed her couldn't meet her eyes. Thomas adjusted his glasses, but his composure faltered a blink too long, a glance too quick. Crockett saw it. The audience saw it. The cameras didn't miss a second. She pressed on, her rhythm building. "You've spoken about personal responsibility, so let's talk about yours. You took an oath not to a party, not to a donor, but to the truth. And truth does not require friendship, favors, or first-class flights. Truth requires courage. There it was, that word again. Courage. The heartbeat of her entire life. The sound that had followed her from Dallas courtrooms to these marble halls. "I don't need to raise my voice to be heard," she said softly. "Because the truth is louder than arrogance," a journalist whispered into their recorder. "She's dismantling him." Another just-mouthed, "Wow." She turned her gaze briefly to the audience, as though speaking to America itself. There are people watching this who can't afford the luxury of silence. Families evicted, workers cheated, veterans ignored. They keep their promises every day. The least we can do is keep ours. Each line landed like a pulse. Strong, relentless. The hearing had transformed into something else, less a confrontation, more a confession demanded by history itself. Thomas's defenders shifted in their seats, their scripts useless now. There was no spin strong enough to compete with sincerity. And then came the sentence that would replay across social media, television, and memory for years. "When you sit in silence while justice burns, you become part of the fire." The room froze. Some gasped. Others simply stared. That line was not a quote, it was a verdict. For a moment it was as if time itself stopped to write it down. The microphones caught the silence perfectly, a single, sacred second of reckoning. The narrator's voice cut in. It wasn't just a rebuttal. It was a reckoning. Screens across America lit up Twitter, TikTok, Instagram. Loops of that single sentence played over dramatic music. Hashtags multiplied like sparks. "Part of the fire," trending at #1 within hours. Commentators called it the line that turned a hearing into history. Back in the room, Crockett didn't gloat. She didn't smile. She simply closed her folder, the sound crisp, deliberate, final. It wasn't triumph, she felt it was release. Years of frustration, of watching power masquerade as righteousness, had finally been voiced. Thomas sat still, chin low. He wasn't defeated, not publicly, not officially, but something in his silence felt permanent. The arrogance had been stripped away, leaving only the quiet weight of exposure. The narrator continued, solemn yet electrified. What America saw that day wasn't outrage. It was reclamation, a reminder that dignity still has defenders. Outside the hearing, the reaction built like a storm. Cable networks replayed the moment with banners reading, "Crockett's mic drop heard round America." Protesters cheered in front of courthouses. Students quoted her line in classrooms. A late-night host called it the most poetic cross-examination since the Bible. But inside, as the cameras dimmed and staffers began to shuffle papers, Crockett remained in her seat. Her breath was slow, her posture unwavering. She knew what she'd done. She also knew what would come next. The spin, the criticism, the attempts to bury her under headlines and half-truths. That didn't matter. What mattered was that she had spoken for those who couldn't. She had named the fire, and for a moment made power answer to the people. A reporter whispered to a colleague, "This isn't the end. It's the ignition." And as the chamber slowly emptied, the narrator returned, voice low and prophetic. She didn't just confront a man. She confronted a myth, the idea that corruption can hide forever behind robes and respectability. And when she spoke, it wasn't anger that filled the room. It was justice remembering its own name. Cut to slow-motion replay, her calm expression. The flicker of recognition on his face. The phrase, "part of the fire," looping like a heartbeat over swelling strings. Then fade to black, replaced by a single line in white letters. But the world outside that chamber had just begun to roar. It started like a Spark 1 clip, 15 seconds long, posted by an intern who couldn't believe what she'd just witnessed. No fancy editing, no commentary. Just Jasmine Crockett's calm face, her voice ringing with measured fire. "When you sit in silence while justice burns, you become part of the fire." By morning, it had become a storm. On Twitter, the quote was everywhere. On TikTok, creators layered her words over slow-motion footage of protests, sunsets, courtroom doors closing with finality. On Instagram, the line became digital art, her silhouette outlined in flames of gold. Captions reading, "Truth doesn't whisper, it roars." The hashtag, "Shock Crockett was right," trended at #1 in less than 3 hours. Celebrities joined in the singer with 20 million followers who tweeted, "She said what we've all been thinking." The actor who posted, "Courage looks like this." Even politicians from opposite aisles couldn't resist acknowledging it. Some praised her bravery, others condemned her tone. But by then, tone didn't matter. The country had chosen sides not left or right, but honest or complicit. Cable news scrambled to catch up. Split screens filled with commentators debating the moment, replaying the clip in slow motion, dissecting every word like scripture. One anchor said, "This isn't just a viral quote. It's a cultural checkpoint, a line between the old world of untouchable power and the new demand for accountability." And while the airwaves buzzed, the streets began to hum with the same energy. College students painted her quote on protest signs. Murals appeared overnight in Houston, Oakland, and D.C. Crockett's face beside the phrase, "Be the gavel," not the echo. The emotional rhythm spread like music outrage first, then pride, then unity. Clips emerged of young black women watching the hearing together, shouting at the screen, cheering at her line. One girl, maybe 16, tears in her eyes, said to her phone camera, "That's how you speak truth to power. That's how you let them know we're not afraid anymore." The narrator's voice enters, reflective and electric. For years, the system told people like her to wait, to calm down, to play nice. But dignity has a sound, and America just heard it loud and clear. The old guard didn't know what to do. Overnight, their polished narratives cracked. Commentators who had dismissed Crockett as emotional were now forced to address her as effective. Think tanks convened emergency panels. Editorials appeared with uneasy titles, "The Crockett Moment, Accountability or Anarchy." But the public had already decided. In the comments, on screens, in streets, one message drowned out the rest. She didn't break decorum. She broke the silence. The montage intensifies TikTok edits with epic film scores, fan-made merchandise flooding Etsy, clips of teachers quoting her in civics classes. The line "part of the fire" becomes a refrain, sampled into remixes, stitched into poetry slams, echoed at rallies. And then came the talk shows. Jasmine's calm, steady face appearing on screens across America, not defensive, not boastful, but grounded. When asked if she planned the line, she smiled slightly. "No," she said. "It just felt like the truth finally got tired of waiting." That single sentence reignited the wave. News outlets turned it into headlines. Late-night hosts joked, "Even the fire's asking her for permission now." Memes bloomed faster than punditry. But beneath the humor was reverence, the sense that something had shifted, permanently. For once, it wasn't just outrage trending. It was admiration. It was belief. The audience didn't just watch her speak. They felt spoken for. In living rooms, immigrant families nodded in silence, recognizing a courage they'd carried all their lives. Workers on lunch breaks watched her clip on cracked phones, whispering, "That's what we needed." Teachers replayed her speech in classrooms, asking students, "What does justice sound like to you?" The internet had turned one sentence into a movement, a digital uprising built on moral clarity. And with every share, every repost, every hashtag, the story grew louder. Then came the turning point, the split-screen montage that defined the movement's visual language. On one side, footage of the old world Thomas, politicians defending him, boardrooms, yachts, marble offices. On the other, Jasmine Crockett walking through Congress, surrounded by young aides and flashing cameras, her stride unbothered, her presence commanding. The contrast said everything. One world crumbling, another rising. The narrator's tone deepens. In that split screen, America saw its choice. Between silence and courage, between comfort and conviction. And for once, the crowd didn't hesitate. The clips accelerate reactions, duets, debates, tributes. A teacher in Detroit, a nurse in Atlanta, a veteran in Arizona. Ordinary Americans speaking into cameras, repeating her line with conviction. When you sit in silence while justice burns, you become part of the fire. Each repetition builds a chorus, voices overlapping, harmonizing, roaring. Crockett had become something more than a politician. She was a mirror, a reflection of the people's exhaustion and their hope. And yet, amid the noise, she stayed grounded. In an interview late that night, when asked how it felt to go viral, she simply said, "If my words woke people up, good. But I didn't speak for clicks. I spoke for clarity." The reporter nodded. But the moment hung in the air because clarity had become the rarest form of power. Outside the Capitol, someone projected her quote in giant white letters against the stone walls. Crowds gathered beneath it, taking selfies, chanting softly, "Crockett was right." And as the camera pulls back from screens, from streets, from voices, the narrator returns. Voice quiet but resolute. She had shaken the walls of power. But what Jasmine Crockett said next would elevate this moment into history. The storm had passed. The headlines had quieted. The cameras dimmed. The hashtags settled into memory. But the echo of her words remained not in the noise of the news cycle, but in the silence that follows understanding. For weeks, America had argued, reposted, debated. But when the noise faded, one sentence lingered like scripture. When you sit in silence while justice burns, you become part of the fire. It played again, softly now, over slow orchestral strings, her voice calm, resolute, replayed in slow motion, as if the country itself needed to listen twice. The narrator spoke over the footage, reflective and steady. She didn't shout. She didn't threaten. She simply told the truth, and truth, once spoken, does not return to silence. The screen showed images that needed no commentary, students quoting her in classrooms, citizens holding candles at vigils, her words painted across protest banners like sacred text. And somewhere amid those faces were the people who had once stopped believing change was possible, now remembering what courage looks like when it's unfiltered by fear. Jasmine Crockett hadn't won a political victory that day. She had won something rarer, a moral one. Because moral victories don't come with trophies or press releases. They come with reflection, with the quiet recognition that the balance of dignity has shifted, even slightly, toward the just. In the calm after the storm, Crockett herself spoke softly when asked what the moment meant. "It's not about me," she said. "It's about the people who needed to hear that justice still has a pulse." Her tone was modest, but her message was timeless. The story was no longer hers alone. It belonged to everyone who'd ever felt voiceless in the presence of power. The narrator's voice deepened, turning the lens outward. For generations, we've been told to wait for the arc of justice to bend on its own. But history doesn't bend, people do. And sometimes it takes one voice, firm and fearless, to remind us that the arc moves only when we push. The imagery swells Crockett walking through a hallway of towering columns, sunlight streaming through high windows. Her footsteps echo like punctuation marks on history's unfinished sentence. The music builds, violins rising behind the narration. The arc of justice isn't straight, but it bends when we dare to speak. Each replay of her line feels different now. In the hearing, it was confrontation. On the internet, it was revolution. Here, in reflection, it's scripture, a moral compass pointing home. Across the country, those who once felt invisible see themselves in her calm defiance. She becomes a symbol not of rebellion, but of reclamation, the belief that truth still belongs to the people, not the powerful. Teachers cite her in civics lessons. Ministers quote her from pulpits. Parents tell their children, "See? That's how you fight without losing your grace." Her composure becomes legend proof that dignity can be louder than rage. That restraint can still command fear in the halls of arrogance. The narrator continues, "Power trembles not because truth is violent, but because truth is undeniable. It does not beg for permission. It does not seek approval. It simply stands, and the world rearranges around it." As the music swells, the screen fades through a montage. The hearing room now empty, sunlight catching on the wood grain of the witness table. Her seat still, waiting. The camera lingers on that silence, the kind that speaks louder than any speech. Then, slowly, the orchestration softens to a single piano note as the narrator delivers the closing reflection. She didn't just challenge corruption, she redefined courage. In an age of noise, she reminded us that the sharpest weapon is truth spoken without fear, and that when truth finally finds its voice, even the mighty must listen. The piano fades. Her voice returns one last time, echoing softly. When you sit in silence while justice burns, you become part of the fire. A beat of silence, then the final words appear on screen, white text over a dark background. Simple, unadorned, unshakable. When truth speaks, power trembles. The hearing was over, but the echo refused to die. Across America, the clip kept replaying on phones, in classrooms, in living rooms where families watched with pride and disbelief. Jasmine Crockett hadn't just silenced Clarence Thomas. She had amplified truth itself. Her words, once contained within the marble walls of Congress, now pulsed through the veins of a restless nation. Every replay carried new weight, a reminder that courage is contagious, that truth doesn't fade once spoken, it multiplies. The narrator's voice returns, soft yet resolute. That's what a mic drop really is. Not the end of a sentence, but the start of a movement. Cut to a montage. Faces of Americans from every walk of life. Students, veterans, mothers, factory workers repeating her line in quiet solidarity. Each one different, but all united by a single conviction. Silence is no longer an option. Crockett's moment became more than a soundbite. It became a call. A call to speak up in boardrooms, in classrooms, in dinner tables where truth is too often edited for comfort. It became a reminder that democracy doesn't die in darkness. It dims in silence. And so, as the music swells with cinematic hope, the narrator's voice rises. If her words lit a fire in you, don't let it fade. Speak, share, question, stand. Be louder than corruption. Be louder than fear. The screen fades to black, the final line appearing in bold white letters not as a slogan, but as a pledge. Because silence protects power, but voices like hers protect us all.